of government. The guest host for this broadcast is my good friend, U.S. Bureau Chief of LifeSite News, Ben Johnson. He is also a wonderful author who has written the book Party of Defeat. 2008, he came out with this book, and it was co-authored by David Horowitz. Senator Kyle wrote a review on Real Clear Politics. This is extraordinary because what he outlined in that book is coming to fruition today. And he was just citing history. But he did it so well. Ben, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. Great to be with you.
When I heard this, I thought of you, and in light of the Bergdahl swap, I think we are seeing it manifest before our eyes. Let's go to President Bush, 2008. Before the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, speaking to the issue of appeasement in the war on terror or war on Islamofascism. Roll it.
Some seem to believe that we should negotiate with the terrorists and radicals as if some ingenious argument will persuade them they have been wrong all along. We've heard this foolish delusion before. As Nazi tanks crossed into Poland in 1939, an American senator declared, "Lord, if I could only have talked to Hitler, all this might have been avoided." We have an obligation to call this what it is: the false comfort of appeasement, which has been repeatedly discredited by history.
Tell me, is that what our president currently believes in Barack Obama?
Well, Barack Obama sometimes sounds a lot like Senator William Borah, who made those comments. By the way, my historical Tourette's would not allow me to pass over who made that statement.
That was
awesome.
awesome.
Spoken to Hitler. William Borah of Idaho, if I remember correctly. But Obama very much sounds like this. When he was running for president, his entire campaign platform came down to one thing: me. I will go around the world. I will fix all of the problems in the world because I'm Barack Obama. And we've seen how well that has played out. He very much followed through with what he promised he would do. Went on a worldwide apology tour, said that he would engage with states that we hadn't spoken with before. He's done that. Began speaking and negotiating with the Muslim Brotherhood, began speaking and negotiating with the Taliban, negotiating essentially the terms of our surrender in Afghanistan. And to sweeten the deal, he released these 5 terrorist jihadist masterminds who were being held in Qatar but allowed to mingle with the population in exchange for Bergdahl, who apparently deserted in June 2009 in the middle of a war, and people died trying to find him. This is the trade that we have made. Someone like George W. Bush, who certainly had failings you and I talked about, certainly in terms of economic policies and other policies, but when it came to the definition of evil, he understood that there are certain things you can do to lessen terrorism. Not all Muslims in the world are terrorists, but there is a certain core population of the Muslim religion, which a certain view of the Muslim religion we would refer to as the Islamist movement, or the Islamic fundamentalist movement, that is absolutely irreconcilable, that is bent on jihad, and that cannot be dealt with in any way. It must simply be fought, and that war will only end one of two ways. Either they will stop fighting, and they won't, or we will prevail.
With that in mind, here is Susan Rice, 2008, responding to the speech, because President Obama, as you said, made it all about him. And the president, actually the Bush administration, had to say, hey, look, we're really talking about Carter. I don't know if they said that expressly, but they did, or specifically, but they did say it was not to President Obama. Of course, Barack Obama should be a talk show host. He thinks everything is about him, and he never takes responsibility. I love beating myself up. It's fun. Now, tell me something.
And me too.
Yes, and you too. But we're brothers, you know. So tell me something, Ben. When you hear David Schuster, you can remind people of who he is after the clip, and Susan Rice, then the National Security Advisor to the President, campaign, now it's much worse, of course, say this. Your thoughts. Roll it.
Forward on that very point. Some people would suggest there's a fine line between talking with somebody and dealing with somebody. So let's try to pin down your campaign here. Given that Hamas is a powerful force in the Palestinian territories, none of us like it, at least nobody here. What sort of interaction, if at all, would an Obama administration have? Would there be any talks? Would there be no talks at any level? Spell it out for us.
No talks at any level.
Ben.
Yeah, that's not the most recent word out of the White House, as I understood it this past week. The Obama administration said that they would be willing to talk with the United Government of Palestine, which is Fatah, and Hamas. Those are the two parties that make up the government of the Palestinian state. And they said that they're certainly willing to negotiate with the government, which includes members of Hamas. They're very happy to do so, as long as this government follows certain quote-unquote preconditions. They just don't ever bother to spell out what these preconditions are, which doesn't surprise me. The last time they sent out a red line ended up being rather embarrassing for them. So it doesn't surprise me in the least they wouldn't spell that out in terms of Hamas. Hamas is an organization that its 1988 charter, which has never been repealed or amended in any way, calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, not simply the 67 borders, which Obama's expressed doubts about, but the entire state of Israel from its creation in 1948, and calls for a worldwide hunt of all Jews around the world. Those are the people that they're negotiating with. So I think George W. Bush's point is very much apropos, which is that there is a certain force of evil that would like to eradicate all the Jews in the world, would like to eradicate essentially all of the non-Muslims, those who will not eventually join Allah's loving embrace, and they are represented in the Palestinian government that our president is going to negotiate with. He doesn't recognize evil. I think that he thinks that he can win them over, and frankly, I think that our president has a soft spot for Islamists.
Now, with that in mind, there was a political calculation, and I am throwing something at you that I did not outline earlier, but I know you love that. So this is Chuck Todd, and it was a clip I was going to play earlier. But Chuck Todd, it's clip number 2, speaking to the issue with Andrea Mitchell about the Bergdahl release. You outlined in Party of Defeat, brilliantly, by the way, how Democrats put national security on the altar of politics and went full force. In that light, do you believe that the Obama administration misjudged our appreciation for what our soldiers do and our outrage of what our enemies and who they are and what they do? Here's the clip. Roll it.
And what's been interesting, Andrea, is that what's caught the White House off guard here, they were expecting criticisms of Gitmo, criticisms of the detainees that were chosen. They did not expect this criticism of the attempt to go get Bergdahl in the way that it was done. And that appears to be what's caught them off guard, and that's why I think they look like they're on their back feet on this one.
And Chuck, it does seem that they thought that the military would rally around them, that would give them the protection, if you will, political protection from dealing through the galleries with the Taliban.
Right, that there would be some sort of, as you said, rally around the principle of leave no man behind. If you take one of the quotes from the Pentagon spokesperson today that appeared in the New York Times, I thought was interesting when he said, when somebody goes overboard on a Navy ship, doesn't matter whether they were pushed, whether they fell, or something else happened, or they jumped themselves, the boat turns around and goes and gets them. But that wasn't necessarily what they were saying on Sunday. On Sunday, I think they thought there would be some euphoria around this, that the only POW that was remaining in Afghanistan, that there would be a rally around the flag. That didn't happen. They're surprised that they haven't gotten more criticism about the situation at Gitmo and the issue of which detainees are up for negotiation. And then you heard the president basically admit that Congress wasn't consulted, and at the same time said, but they were sort of consulted. They knew this was on the table.
So do they think that we don't care, or that we just don't know enough, and a shiny object of some kind, some flash news of somebody being released, we will just go, oh, release, great, wonderful, that's great, and not look at who he is and how he came into the custody? we do obviously wish him the very best in the sense of mental health, and we can't imagine what he goes through, but being described as a deserter, there are consequences, and we'll let the authorities work that out through the evidence, of course, rule of law. But then we look at the Taliban and what they are receiving, their cabinet back, blood on their hands. So do they think we're stupid? What is the calculation here, Ben?
I think that the Obama administration has been so used to having a compliant media, one that does not look into anything that he says or investigate in any way, shape, or form, that they thought they would just roll over top of them with this one as well. They thought, we're getting an American back, this is fantastic, and that would be the headline. It would trump everything else. Who this person was, Bo Bergdahl, I don't think that they thought anyone would look into it. And from what we can understand, there are reports that the chain of command actually did its best to silence people who were trying to speak about this. There's an Army specialist named Josh Fuller who says he was told by the chain of command not to say a thing about Bergdahl allegedly walking off base in June of 2009. So there's some question about whether there was an effort to silence people who knew him so that no one would be able to find this out. But the cat is out of the bag. If this is actually the case, it wouldn't surprise me in the least that Obama would do this, that he would move heaven and earth to free someone who was, in fact, if he is, in fact, a deserter. Barack Obama's view of the United States, as we've said, and as David Horowitz and I wrote in that book, Party of Defeat, their fundamental view of the United States is that the United States was conceived in original sin. Conceived in the sin of racism and genocide and hatred and white privilege and everything else that's terrible and bad, Christian exploitation of the beautiful harmony that other religions have with the earth. And because of that, we must be punished in some way. Everything that I believe Barack Obama has two real functions. One of them is as a massive community organizer of the world. He wants to bring together those parts of his coalition and to defeat those who are not part of his coalition. And the other one is to right what he believes are the historical wrongs inflicted by the United States. And that's where the greater foreign policy aims come in. As you look at what he's done around the world, I think that this really shows that this is exactly what he's trying to do. We have a government in Libya that he essentially engineered the toppling of in a war that was never voted on by Congress or approved in any way, shape, or form. There, lo and behold, the black flag of Al-Qaeda flies over Tripoli. 4 people are killed in Benghazi. There's no accountability whatsoever because of that. But he's given Iran essentially a free hand. He has stoked chaos on the border of Israel and Syria, and I think that he's doing everything that he can to undermine the U.S. position in the United States, undermine certainly the 67 borders of Israel. And this is, I think that this is his view that what he is trying to do is undo the historical wrongs that the United States has inflicted on the world, and he sees the Middle East as one of those wrongs.
And astutely pointing out the black flag of Al-Qaeda flying over the embassy in Cairo during that awful day of 9/11/2012, which we also obviously saw what took place in the consulate of Benghazi, a diplomatic post.
Yeah.
I would like to say
in Tripoli, and of course his undermining of Hosni Mubarak, who was a repressive dictator, but who made peace with Israel and was essentially pro-American in his foreign policy. Again, I wouldn't want to live under him, but his undermining Hosni Mubarak, and there you see this situation. You played that clip with David Schuster and Susan Rice. Susan Rice, of course, the one who went on the Benghazi media blitz and blamed it all on a YouTube video nobody saw, and people end up going to jail because he was trying to cover his story. But I think that, and that was, again, something the media didn't cover, I think that emboldened him to go forward with this Taliban swap for Bo Bergdahl, that no one would look into what was going on, and that perhaps he could work through the chain of command to make sure no one ever found out.
And you know what's next, I truly believe, and just citing the black flag of Al-Qaeda over the embassy in Cairo, I would say that it's the blind sheik. Make no mistake, I believe that is absolutely the next request. And they're going after the blind sheik. They've wanted him for so long. They want him back. And Andrew C. McCarthy prosecuted him, of course. And Tom Jocelyn pointed out the black flag of Al-Qaeda rising. We spoke about that and you highlighting it. But my point is, I wanted to make that point. If they're looking for the big I realize Gitmo allows them to empty Gitmo, and that's their strategy, or at least that's the one that's been speculated. If, in light of that thinking, last night Colonel Clue spoke to that too. But tell me something, Ben. Is that something you see in the realm of possibility? Wouldn't that be that's the next big item for the terrorists?
That's always been their big ticket item. This is something that has been on their wish list for a very long time. They've made these requests of the United States, and of course George W. Bush stood so strong, wouldn't negotiate in any way, shape, or form. But the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman, who is of course tied to the first World Trade Center bombing more than 20 years ago now, and is thankfully behind bars. But we've seen the easy sentence that his lawyer, Lynn Stewart, got. She got initially basically a commendation from the judge, who said she did a wonderful job. She was the one who released a message from Rahman back to the Islamist group in Egypt who was trying to overthrow Mubarak, saying that they should go forward and not honor any kind of peace treaty with Mubarak, to essentially say you should go forward with terrorism. So we've seen an easy prosecution there, and I think that they're going to do everything they can. But I don't believe, I certainly hope, even Barack Obama wouldn't release Rahman. But closing Gitmo, you've got Rahman acolytes going out, Rahman in miniature being released all over the world. And the question would be, how many American soldiers are going to have to die because Barack Obama hates the United States?
And reporting on Monday, Catherine Herridge reported that now it's up to 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 3 of the folks released from Gitmo have gone back to the battle. So in their mind, going back to killing innocents, obviously. Now we have 10 years tomorrow, the passing of Ronald Reagan. And this is kind of a shout out to those of us who people say, oh, Reagan's legacy, you're going away. Y'all are way too conservative. Here's what Ronald Reagan had to say in his National Association of Evangelicals address in 1983. Roll it.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. When our founding fathers passed the First Amendment, they sought to protect churches from government interference. They never intended to construct a wall of hostility between government and the concept of religious belief itself. The evidence of this permeates our history and our government. The Declaration of Independence mentions the Supreme Being no less than 4 times. In God We Trust is engraved on our coinage. The Supreme Court opens its proceedings with a religious invocation, and the members of Congress open their sessions with a prayer. I just happen to believe the school children of the United States are entitled to the same privileges as soldiers. Last year, I sent to Congress a constitutional amendment to restore prayer to public schools. Already this session, there's growing bipartisan support for the amendment, and I am calling on the Congress to act speedily to pass it and to let our children pray. Some of you being held during the students' own time. The First Amendment never intended to require government to discriminate against religious speech.
Ben, let me ask you, do you believe that President Obama is the bizarro Ronald Reagan, the exact opposite?
He's the mirror image. He truly is. The one thing that Ronald Reagan exuded, he exuded 2 things. One of them was optimism. You have to remember, this was the era of Carter malaise, where the President of the United States was telling Americans, we can't do any better. This might be the best we'll ever do. And Ronald Reagan came along and said, no, America has great promise, we have great potential, our greatest days are ahead of us. And he stood conventional wisdom on its head, and then he brought it into reality. 7 years of unbridled economic growth, policies that set in motion the destruction of the Soviet Union. So American confidence at an all-time high. So that's the reality of Ronald Reagan. And the other thing that he exuded was a belief in life and a belief in God and a belief in America.
On that note,
again,
on that note, we have this gem from the same. Roll it.
More than a decade ago, a Supreme Court decision literally wiped off the books of 50 states statutes protecting the rights of unborn children. Abortion on demand, now takes the lives of up to 1.5 million unborn children a year. Human life legislation ending this tragedy will someday pass the Congress, and you and I must never rest until it does. Unless and until it can be proven that the unborn child is not a living entity, then its right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness must be protected.
Ben Johnson, 30 seconds. You tell me what this message means for those of us who we will not compartmentalize our faith, as you know and as you understand fundamentally as a Christian. Speak to us.
People sometimes say that Ronald Reagan couldn't be elected today because he was too left-wing. This is a president who wanted to abolish the Department of Education, wanted to pass a constitutional amendment to protect all human life, supported prayer in schools, and his greatest line was one that his speechwriters wanted to take out of his speech: Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yes.
We who believe in that full spectrum of conservatism are following Ronald Reagan's legacy. And
there
that
you
is
go.
the last.
Ben Johnson, thank you. Thank you all.
Sharia law is a growing